Tēnei taku mihi ki ngā iwi taki ki ngā mana whenua katoa I konei. Ka mihi o koutou manga, o koutou marae, o koutou whenua. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa, ko uria hou o rongawhakata. My greetings to the Indigenous people who have status on all the lands we're on. I greet your mountains, your places, your lands. I'm descended from Rongawhakata, a tribe of New Zealand. I'm Diane Menzies. The topic of our meeting is broad, and my focus is on cultural landscapes and climate change. And what better example to start off with than Tongariro National Park, the first cultural landscape inscribed for World Heritage, and the lands of the tribe Tongariro, who gifted the area to the government to prevent it being subdivided by colonial settlers. The tribes still hold the responsibility, ethical responsibility for managing their lands, but the Department of Conservation manage it now, including for climate change. I asked the Department of Conservation for some examples of what they were doing to do with climate change, adaptation and mitigation in Tongariro National Park. And they gave me 2 slides about helicopter emissions and control of CO2 emissions. This shows monitoring of emissions, and the next slide will show you that they're even getting to helicopter type and what are the different impacts from different sorts of helicopters for both tourism and land management. But moving from detailed monitoring and adaptation for CO2 emissions to one of the largest tribes in New Zealand and the work that they are doing to do with climate change. Ngāi Tahu have been looking at climate change for at least 40 years, and this is their document on strategies and priorities. One aspect that they're particularly looking at is awareness that their people might have of climate change and how they can adapt. This idea is about the tree, kahikatea, and how its roots intertwine, interlock, and actually blend into each other for survival. The analogy is that people need to work together for all the sort of issues linked to climate change and ecology, economics, and so on. Moving to a more complex way of addressing climate change, which is not looked at individually, but as part of ethical practice, at the same time managing for ecosystems to prevent ecosystems extinction where possible, looking particularly at the urban area. And this is Amanda Yates's tool for looking at that, a compass to look at what is the situation now in the area and how might it be better managed for the future. Instead, a very simple example, Mangere residents are looking at climate change adaptation as well. They are a largely Pasifika and Maori community. They're corresponding on Facebook and all other social media. This is an example of flooding in Mangere just recently. And finally, as examples, looking to cultural landscape and Indigenous knowledge and perspectives. A couple of weeks ago, Indigenous representatives met to discuss what could be definitions of cultural landscape and what is the Indigenous dream. How could an Indigenous dream for cultural landscapes, their cultural landscapes, be identified and pursued at an international level, which will then benefit communities? So to summarise, climate change isn't considered separately by Indigenous peoples rather than part of overall thinking in how we can manage for the future sustainably, how we can use old knowledge developed through maybe thousands of years to address climate change and other impacts. People are part of that. People are the landscape are the people. Awareness is important, and taking a very broad perspective which has deep ramifications to everything that needs to be considered. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.